Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm your host, Oscar. You can follow the show on Twitter at MiamiPod. TheMiamiPod.com is the website where you can find the iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and RSS feeds, as you can follow us on whichever device you want on there. We were planning to do this with Ian on Thursday, but unfortunately I had some animal issues, so having to do it on the morning of the Jets game. But we'll get to my thoughts on the Rams game. Some more Timmins information has come out, so we'll touch on that and then look ahead to the Jets game. Although I think there's not a huge amount to talk about the Jets. I think it's more about the Dolphins really and what we want to see from them, and maybe some rotations and ways to get other players on the field. But we'll start with the Chargers game. I'll probably call them San Diego Chargers at some point over this. Apologies in advance to any Rams Chargers fans that are listening. I'll just call them the Rams then. So this is going great. But we'll start with the game. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you assumingly watched the game and won or lost, whichever side you won, by kicking. And then I guess that's probably why the Dolphins went for Parkey, because of that range. That's something I don't think we would have seen with prior special teams units, and that kind of range. Parkey does seem to be kind of up and down with his kicking, so I could imagine with, like, in another situation, maybe even if he got closer at a different angle, he's not making that kick. But that was good to see, he can clutch out. And that's been a trend with Gase. I think this whole game is maybe an indication that some of the trends from last year aren't going to go away. Some of those being positive trends of being able to win games like most teams don't. Generally games where you go into the fourth quarter behind, and the volume Miami have under Gase, you're not going to win as many as Miami have. So that's a really positive. I guess the negative is, again, a slow start, and the volume to Landry in the first half, just the offensive scheme in the first half. I mean, we knew going into the season with Cutler as the quarterback, it was going to be a lot of short stuff. But I think that you can be short stuff and not always to Landry. And that was kind of the plan in the first half. The second half, there was some more crosses to Devontae Parker, which opened up the offense a bit more. And just if you look at the stats for the game, just the fact that I think Landry had 13 receptions, Parker had 4 receptions. Parker was targeted a bit more, but the lower percentage targets some of the throws, and some were just throwaways by Cutler. Particularly, I think it was a 4th down play or 3rd down. Where I think Cutler got some blame for not being precise, but that was he threw it out. But Parker had more yards than Landry on almost a third or less than a third of the receptions. So that's just an issue in terms of the ball distribution. It got much better in the second half, and that's been another positive trend with Gase over the 2 years. Now, going into the second year, his second half adjustments have been really good. I think both sides of the ball, they adjusted really well. Other than I would say with the quarterbacks, but we'll get to the cornerback play a bit later on. But I think it was what we expected in terms of the pace of the offense. It was no huddle. It was still relatively slow. With the passing game, it was predominantly low, high reads. The odd time it was a high read. The second read would be in the flat or a dump off. So it's a very conservative offensive plan. At least in the first half, it opened up slightly, but still not more. We didn't really see Cutler get to more than a third progression. So we'll see if that happens. I doubt it would happen against the Jets, just because they don't really have guys that can cover people. So you should expect that first read is going to be open. And Cutler, even if it's a small window, he's more likely to throw to a small window that's open than go for a progression. And that's why we kind of saw so many short stuff, because the progression was it to be short. The first read is short, and you're generally going to be open in those first 5 yards if that's a route you're running. So that's why we saw the ball go to Landry so much. We'll see how that. I mean, I would imagine Landry and Ajayi get less volume today, and that's partly because Miami should win this game comfortably, and they won't need to lean on Ajayi as much. I guess that's, for me, that's a positive, that they were in a close game and they kept the ball in Ajayi. That last drive, just every snap, I mean, apart from the screen, they maybe shouldn't throw to Ajayi, just hand it off to him. But that's positive. They know who the star on the offense is, and it's Ajayi, which is a step forward from last year where Ajayi didn't play week 1. So that was a really great positive, I think, and exciting to see them trust in his ability. It will be interesting how the rotation at running back. I think Drake had 1 snap and Williams had 2. What was interesting is there were definitely some third down situations where last year we would have seen Damian Williams in. I think I tweeted after them when they occurred. So that they're kind of seeing Ajayi, maybe they're more confident in his pass protection, which was his biggest weakness coming out of Boise State, or maybe they're more comfortable with him in the passing game, that they can rely on him on third down. So that's going to be like another thing to like see as it progresses, whether he's staying in third down more often, if they're going to rotate by drive or by play. So that's going to be some kind of things we don't have clarity on at the moment because he was relied on so heavily in a close game. I think most close games we're going to see Ajayi playing more often than anyone else. Also, I guess this is like there was a lot of, I've seen preseason hype around Drake and Grant. Both of them, I think, saw the field once. They're not taking wide receivers off the field again this year. Carew, I think, saw the field twice. So I think we're going to expect 3 wide receivers a lot. They rotated the tight end slightly more, but still, it's mainly Julius Thomas. I think there was 20 or so snaps with Sano. Gray played a couple and made a pretty bad mistake on one of the plays. So we may see kind of his usage go down. I thought Julius still looks a bit, he's really bad in the run game. I don't know why they're using him when they have Fasano. I guess the reasoning would be that Fasano is a key that they're going to run, but I think Fasano's enough of a passing threat, particularly across the middle, on crosses and slants, that he doesn't have to be that. But they seem compelled to run the ball with Julius Thomas in the lineup, which is, I think, worrying because you've got to play guys to their strengths, and we've seen Julius Thomas get blown up enough in the run to know it's not a strength. He did have a couple of good blocks. I believe it may have been for one of the, I can't remember. There was one big play by Ajayi where Julius got a pretty good block. It was on a linebacker though, so you can take that with a pinch of salt if you wish. I think that's, in terms of Cutler, I thought he looked kind of as expected. A couple of bailouts by Devontae Parker on throws that were underthrown. But generally he looked okay. There was another third down where he could have really ran for it and tried to throw it to Julius Thomas that went out of bounds. It was pretty bad ball placement, pretty bad body control by Julius Thomas, and a bad decision to make that throw in the first place. So there's a lot of blame to go over in that play. Really, he could have pump faked and ran that in. So that was kind of a big drive killer, but he's not the greatest quarterback outside of the pocket. We'll move on to, I guess, the offensive line play. Tunsil had the big sack give up against Ingram that ended a drive. Just his feet looked slow, and Ingram's a phenomenal pass rusher, so it's a hard matchup, but it's just he was slow getting to it, and Ingram's going to get lower than, so if you're not in front of him, like you're not going to get lower than him to win the leverage battle. Outside of that, I thought Juwan James probably had one of his better games. Maybe he's just a player that needs consistency on the line, although there's not a huge amount of consistency this year with a couple of guys going down early, having Bushrod next to him, having Pouncey back, having Tunsil as a left tackle the whole season. Maybe that gives more clarity in James's kind of the role he has on the offensive line, and particularly in pass protection. So I think that's good, and just running outside zone is going to be the best thing for him. He's still not great, but there's more leeway in outside zone for mistakes. And we saw like one of the big Ajayi runs, Bushrod got pushed right back into the backfield, but the defensive lineman, I can't remember who it was, couldn't disengage, so it ended up being a big gain because there was a massive hole there from the amount of upfield penetration one player got, where the rest of the defensive line were going horizontal. So you can have part of your line play get beaten up on, but that can create a hole in itself. I think those were my main takeaways on the offense. As for the Jets game, I want to see more variety in targets early on in the game, and hopefully they learn from the struggles they had this first week. And hopefully by the second half, we won't really have any concrete answers on what the offense is going to do, because it should be a comfortable game, a comfortable win. If this is by far like the easiest or second easiest game for the Dolphins this year, the second easiest would be the Jets at home. So this should be the game where we get to see maybe like Carew and Grant and Drake and see what they can do. It'll be disappointing if it'll be, I guess, telling if we don't see them and it's a big win, because that would either indicate that Gase doesn't trust them at all, and it'll be nice to see what they can do outside of preseason against some competition. Grant was really impressive in preseason, but it was all against third stringers. So it'll be nice to get some film of him going against at least active NFL players, which most of those third stringers won't be, that he faced in preseason. Right, so we'll move on to defensively, and I guess we'll start with the corners. How targeted a lot, and they played a lot more man coverage than we saw them do in preseason, and I thought most people were expecting them to do. And we kind of talked about this when Burke took over, coming from a swapped defensive background, and the front seven hasn't really changed much, but that man coverage, it does not suit the corners, particularly Maxwell and Howard. They can't defend crossing routes and slants. They're going to really struggle in that area all season if they continue to that. It's going to be like the easiest scouting matchup. Whenever you face the Dolphins, you just run outside slants all day and crosses all day. And if we do that against the Patriots, we're going to get absolutely hosed. Partly just because it's playing into Brady's wheelhouse of being able to hit those throws, and he won't have to throw deep, which is a significant weakness of his now. So that's got to be addressed. We did see Miami, the odd game, do weird things in the secondary as a matchup thing. And it looked like Keenan Allen could get any matchup he wanted that game. Like, he was matched up on Kiko Alonso at times. He was matched up on Cameron Wake at times. So the Dolphins were kind of ignoring matchups. We didn't see Howard or Maxwell really go to the slot at all. They just stayed on the boundary and played a lot of man. It's those press, but not physical press. So that's kind of a continuation of last year. When there is press, it's not always physical. And I think we did see I do wonder whether the lack of Timmons was the reason why they went to man coverage. 'Cause Timmons is by far their best coverage linebacker. He can take up the biggest zone over the middle. Kiko really struggles in zone coverage, generally with diagnosing it. Kiko's really good in man coverage or breaking on the ball, so when stuff's in front of him. The longer a play goes on, Kiko loses concentration, or he just doesn't know where his assignment is. He gets lost quite a lot, and so I think that's where the Timmons signings really came in. It's interesting that they went after the Saints linebacker. I can't remember his name now because my brain's number 47 from the Saints. We'll find it. He's more of a Sam linebacker, in my opinion. He will fit with this defense somewhat because it's one read. There's not too much diagnosing going on. Stefan Anthony, that's it. So he got a lot of tackles his rookie year, but he did get lost a lot. And he's kind of similar to Kiko in terms of when he plays at Mike. And the fact that they haven't returned Kiko to Mike with the injury to Macmillan indicates that maybe they want to get the middle linebackers slightly more, or they just want more aggressive outside linebackers in those gaps, because that outside linebacker play last year was pretty poor, particularly with Janelle Jenkins. Stefan Anthony's really great in man coverage, but again, like zone coverage, as soon as you give him two decisions or like two places to look at, that's when the game starts slowing. Like, he looks slow. he's similar to Kiko's, like going downhill. Like if he gets his first read right, he can be really disruptive. It's either if he doesn't get that first read right, then it gets ugly. So to me, it'll be interesting if it's like Kiko and Hull stay as like the nickel linebackers, with Kiko, I would assume, moving to Will, and then Stephen Anthony being Sam if they do go with Anthony starting. So that would be really interesting, and maybe they will go away from man coverage on the outside, thinking that Stephen Anthony has a little bit more range in the back end to make up for when they're playing zone. So I think that would be one thing to look. Obviously, the Jets haven't got phenomenal wide receiver talent, so again, it could be matchup based, and they think that they can have Maxwell and Howard match up against the outside guys on slants. So that would be something to watch. I think that would be like my biggest concern with it is definitely how the Dolphins are using their corners. They're not using them to their strengths, and that's always worrying when. And same with Julius Thomas. It's like when the coaches they don't know the limitations of their players, or don't think they're limitations when they are. And that's always like some of the most worrying stuff, I think. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see if Stephen Anthony plays. I haven't seen May reports of what will be happening with the linebacker situation. We had Godchow play more than Phillips. I think that was partly down to Phillips had an injury. Godchow looked good. He got a lot more single teams this week. This was something we were talking about after the preseason. Is that in preseason we weren't really getting a true representation of what Godchow would be asked to do, because he was getting double teams all the time and being able to split them because teams weren't forcing the strength of their play to force Sue as a one technique. We saw that a lot more against the Chargers, and we saw Sue his biggest plays were when he was at one technique and being able to split the double team. So Godchow had more single teams and was able to. I think he looked a bit more effective than he did in preseason, and that's promising considering it's against better quality than he did play against in the first half of preseason. Anyway, I thought Hayes played really well, particularly against the run. Had a couple of stops for loss. I thought it was interesting that they had Charles Harris playing inside. I think his first snap was playing over the center, so that was interesting. We're going to see. It looks like we'll see more edge players rotate in, with Phillips sounds like Phillips will be out this week, so we'll see how much more they play interior guys inside, or whether Vincent Taylor plays more inside. I would suspect Vincent Taylor would, just because in the past year and so, they've been slightly hesitant outside one game where Jason Jones played a lot of snaps inside. They've been pretty hesitant to do that, but we'll see. I think that'll be interesting, and if it's successful, maybe we'll see it more throughout the season, instead of even when Phillips is back. We'll see maybe more penetrative players, and now that the Dolphins have like no nose tackle active, outside Sue can play nose tackle, but obviously you would rather have him as a free technique. That'll be interesting what they do, particularly on like base run plays where teams go into 12 personnel. The Dolphins don't really have a plugger on that defensive line right now, so they're going to have to be more aggressive, and maybe that's partly the thinking with having Hull as Mike linebacker, is they're going to have their defensive tackles all shooting gaps, and so then you want someone who's maybe a bit more patient, less aggressive as middle linebacker to make up for one of those gap deficiencies. So we'll see how that pans out. I think that'll be really interesting this week to see how the defensive line rotations. Fade didn't play much at all. We saw Andre Branch play, I think, the second most defensive line snaps, which is a bit worrying. He didn't really do anything in that game either. So we'll see. And Wake probably didn't play as much as we probably thought he did. It's interesting they played him so much in preseason and then held him back in the first game of the season. So hopefully that wasn't injury related. And if there was nothing reported, so maybe they were just trying to keep him fresh for that end of the game if they needed a big impact play that he can often produce. I thought the safety play, particularly Rashad Jones, was pretty good. There was some communication problems in the backside. Maybe that's also another reason why they're going to more man zones, more man defense with the corners, is just to lessen the communication in the back seven. That could be quite possible because there was definitely a weakness in preseason, and that's pretty concerning when you're just running vanilla looks and you're not really adapting to what the offense is doing in preseason. So if you can't run a coverage properly in preseason, that's pretty scary. And then special teams, I thought, was fine. There wasn't. I mean, I think the Dolphins have a tendency to run out returns when they probably should just kneel it. I don't know whether that's just like a Rizzy thing of like, oh, we'll take the one big play, and we're fine taking like losing 5 yards on like 5 other returns. I think that's probably more likely, especially given that they have returners that can create those big chunk returns. So that would be my guess. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that's like a fine strategy to apply, so long as you do create those plays. I thought the gunner play was pretty good. I thought the vice play was pretty good. I think special teams it wasn't phenomenal, but it was like good, no like real concerns, and definitely like I think Rizzy's got that unit looking slightly better. I thought the kicker and punter played well. So yeah, I don't think too many concerns around, and especially that the protection as well on kicks was pretty good, and the penetration on I think it was a blocked field goal by you was probably swung that game and enable the Dolphins to be able to be in a position to win it, which they did. I guess we'll talk about, I think we've covered enough about the Stephon Anthony position signing or trade for a 5th round pick. Is probably around the right value. You're getting him on a rookie deal for 2 years. There's some really great highlights of him in man coverage, particularly on like wheel routes and stuff. I think to me that's where he plays his best. Is on players like on tight ends, athletic tight ends, big slots. That's where he's going to flourish and have his big plays. He can come downhill as well. He's like super athletic. It's just like his brain is what limits his athleticism. So like he's going to have a great mock draftable like spider web, but his decision making is going to hold that athleticism back. He's not like a Bobby Wagner or Levante David where he fills that web and is also like making the correct read every single time. So he's not going to be like a top end starter ever, but he's a good supplemental piece. I don't think he's much more than a Sam, but this defense is actually using Sams a little bit more than they did last year. Partly as they're playing dime a lot more. There have been instances where they take off Hull as well in preseason anyway, where they took off Hull and had a Will and Sam out, and generally it was Timmons playing the mic in those situations. So that's kind of interesting. But again, we'll see what happens now that Timmons isn't in that, or we don't think will be in that equation for the rest of the season with his indefinite suspension. So we'll see what happens in regards to rotating, particularly in nickel, whether they just stick with Hull in every down. And we'll see whether Hull stays in the rotation. I think that could be up for question as well at some point. I don't think he's done enough to warrant like an automatic starting position without any competition. And obviously the Dolphins were happy last year with having Kiko as middle linebacker for the entire season. Whether they'll revert back to that, because there was obviously before Hull got injured last season, there was talk about Hull taking that middle linebacker spot from him and moving Kiko to Will. So we could see that happen down the line also. So yeah, I think that's going to be a position where now with the Timmons news, it's going to be constantly in flux this season. And hopefully they find a way to balance it out. Personally, I think it's most likely going to be Hull as Mike, Kiko as Will, and then Anthony as Sam, but that also depends on how quickly Sam can take on the playbook. Move on to the Jets game. In terms of injuries for the Dolphins, I think it's only Phillips as a new injury that will be out. And the Jets are pretty healthy. There's no one of like significant interest that is out. Leonard Williams had a slight wrist injury, and Forte's been full practices. I guess those would be the guys who are going to have the biggest impact in terms of the season. In terms of this season, the Jets are not the team they have been the past couple of years in terms of talent. They still got Wilk and Williams. I guess Morris Claiborne as well. Those are the star players, and it's Forte I think could hurt Miami, but really this is going to be a game where if Miami lose it, they lost it themselves. I guess the worry can be is games in your division are always going to be close. I think if you look back to that season where Seattle, or those couple of seasons, Seattle were the most dominant, there was always the Rams that would challenge them, even when the Rams were one of the worst teams in the league. So there is kind of concern that the team that knows you the best, obviously they've got Casey Rogers over there who knows the defensive line room well, and parts of this staff really well, and players like Wake. So that's going to be, so they have kind of more knowledge. They scout this team more than any other. The Dolphins haven't really changed much from last year in terms of what they're doing, especially, I guess, a little bit on offense, but they're just a slightly more passive version of last year in terms of route complexity and speed. But yeah, I just think, I just can't see a way in which the Jets can win this really, in terms of Kirsch is really good at running. Maybe it's going to be Jermaine Kearse, and that's going to be if they get him on Howard or Maxwell and they're just running crosses all game. McCown can hit those, and that's the only kind of situation I can see the Dolphins and then there's an easy adjustment for that. Maybe that's a worry from last week, as they didn't adjust and go towards that zone when they had 15 odd completions over the middle and crosses and slants. So I guess that's maybe your biggest worry, is that they don't adjust. But I think they've made good enough adjustments at halftime prior. I think this is a game where, personally, I just want to see them come out with a balanced offensive plan where Landry is not the focal point of the offense in the first 15 plays. We don't give him a handoff and a wildcat play in the first quarter. We don't need to do those things against teams like the Jets. I don't think we really should need to do them, especially in the first quarter against the Chargers. That just seems like it was trying to manufacture stuff that wasn't there. The fact that the first deep ball attempt was by Jarvis Landry, although it wasn't really an attempt as much. As a throwaway in the end because the play got blown up. So yeah, I think that's what I'm looking for the most, is a quick start on both sides of the ball, but primarily on offense. I think if we see that it shouldn't be a close game at all. I don't really know what to talk about the Jets. I don't think it's. I can't see any way in which this game should be close, and maybe it'll be concerning if it's close, outside of it just being a division game. But I think that's all I've got to really say about this game. But we'll be hopefully back in midweek to talk about this game. We'll get Ian's thoughts on the first 2 games of the season, and then we'll talk about the game going to London. Safe travels if any of our listeners are going to be coming to London. And thanks for listening. If you've listened live, or if you're listening to the recording, you can follow the show at MiamiPod, themiamipod.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean can all be found on the website. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.